There is a man who has been missing for 19 days. A man who has spent almost 4 decades standing quietly beside one of the most powerful women in America. And yet, when he disappears, Hollywood says nothing. No public concern, no statements, not even a "we're looking into it," just silence. That man is Stedman Graham. For most people, 19 days without answering an email is rude. For Stedman Graham, Oprah Winfrey's long-term partner, it's alarming, especially when the only signs of life come from grainy photos, old Instagram posts, and one suspicious picture taken by a seafood restaurant, not by Stedman himself, by the restaurant. Meanwhile, the two people who should be closest to him, Oprah and Gayle, continue smiling, posting, hosting parties, and appearing at major events. But there is one thing they do not do. They do not show Stedman. Not in video, not in public, not in a way that proves he's actually there. So tonight, we open a case file that has been ignored for far too long. Who is Stedman Graham? Why did he disappear? And why does the world's most famous storyteller suddenly have a story she does not want to tell? Welcome to the investigation.
The man who stood behind a queen. Before we can understand the mystery of his disappearance, we have to understand the man himself. Because Stedman Graham was never just a name beside Oprah Winfrey. He was the silent figure in the background, always present, rarely heard, and almost never centered in any story that involved him. Stedman entered Oprah's wife in 1986 at a charity event. It was the year Oprah's fame was rising fast. The kind of rise that rearranges everything in its path. And into that whirlwind walked a tall, composed man with a gentle smile. A man who seemed perfectly comfortable being the calm spot in someone else's storm. Their relationship began long distance. Oprah herself described it in a 1988 interview, saying that the days apart only made the reunions more meaningful. But even in that early interview, something felt slightly off. Her tone was hesitant. The words didn't flow the way they did when she talked about work or about Gayle. It sounded like someone explaining a relationship rather than living inside it. Still, Stedman stayed, and for decades, he remained that quiet presence. Supportive, polite, and almost invisible. But here's the important question. Was his invisibility his own choice? Or was it part of a narrative designed around the rising empire of Oprah Winfrey? In the next section, we explore the person who reshaped that narrative entirely. Gayle King.
The strange signs. When every proof of life was just a photo. Before a person disappears, their absence begins quietly, not with a bang, but with details so small you barely notice them at first. And that is exactly what happened with Stedman Graham. For months, arguably years, Stedman's presence in Oprah's world grew thinner. Not gone, just reduced. Reduced to glimpses, reduced to silhouettes, reduced to photographs that never seemed fully alive. Let's begin with the most obvious pattern. Every recent sighting of Stedman has been a still image, never a video. Never a clip of him moving, speaking, blinking, anything. Just stills, posed, stiff, strangely distant. The baby shower for Gayle King's son is a perfect example. The photo shows Oprah smiling, Gayle glowing, and Stedman standing beside them like a cardboard cutout. No warmth, no interaction, no candid moment. If you told someone he was photoshopped in, they wouldn't argue with you. Then there's the Instagram activity. Oprah doesn't post Stedman. She posts Gayle. Gayle posts Oprah, but when Stedman appears, it's always filtered through someone else. A tag, a mention, a cameo that feels more like documentation than relationship. And the most suspicious detail of all, Stedman's last proof of life wasn't posted by him or Oprah or Gayle. It was posted by a restaurant. The Costa's Inn in Maryland proudly shared a picture of him posing with crab claws. Not speaking, not smiling naturally, just holding seafood like a man sending coded distress signals. And even that image felt strange because no one else, not customers, not staff, posted anything confirming they met him. Every new sighting raised the same question. Why is every update about Stedman coming from everyone except Stedman?
The 40-year gap, present in Oprah's life, absent in her story. To understand why the recent silence around Stedman feels so unsettling, we have to look at the silence that came long before it. Because for nearly 40 years, Stedman Graham has occupied a strange position. Physically close to Oprah Winfrey, yet practically erased from the public narrative that surrounds her. On paper, he was Oprah's partner. In reality, he lived at the edge of her spotlight. Across decades of Oprah's career, her brand became a cultural empire. She built a talk show, a magazine, a book club, a network, and a multi-billion-dollar influence machine. But in all of that, in every corner of her empire, there was one thing you almost never saw: Stedman. Not in her biggest interviews, not in her iconic magazine covers, not in the book club era, not in OWN, not in documentaries, behind-the-scenes footage, or public celebrations. When Oprah celebrated her Golden Globes Lifetime Achievement Award, a moment about power, courage, and truth, Stedman lingered quietly in the audience, a background object in a room built by the woman he supposedly shared a life with. And when Oprah entered major cultural spaces, she entered them with Gayle. Always Gayle. Book tours, birthday parties, vacations, industry gatherings, weddings, funerals, you name it, Gayle was there. Stedman was not. Even professionally, his trajectory reveals the same pattern. His books were self-published, his branding was inconsistent, his social media posts contained spelling errors no one on Oprah's team would have allowed. If Oprah wanted to elevate his career, she could have done it with a single phone call. But she didn't. So, we're left with an uncomfortable truth. If someone is close enough to share your home, but not close enough to share your story, what does that say about the relationship? And more importantly, what does it say about what happens when that person goes missing? In the next section, we look at the motives, the reasons this disappearance might benefit some people far more than it harms them.
The hidden motives. Who benefits when Stedman disappears? Every mystery becomes clearer when you ask one simple question. Who benefits? Because disappearances, at least the important ones, rarely exist in a vacuum.
They reshape relationships, public images, and power structures. And Stedman's absence is no exception. Let's start with Oprah Winfrey. For decades, Oprah's public identity has operated on two parallel tracks: the global media titan and the woman who doesn't need marriage to define her. Stedman always supported that narrative. His quiet presence reinforced the image of independence without contradiction. But the older the brand becomes, the cleaner the narrative needs to be. And nothing complicates a clean narrative quite like a long-term partner who does not appear, does not speak, and does not fit the polished story the world expects. Then there is Gayle King. Her presence in Oprah's life is not accidental. It is foundational. For nearly 50 years, Gayle has been the confidant, the companion, the public counterpart. She is the person Oprah celebrates, promotes, and proudly stands beside. When Gayle calls herself a proud third-wheeler, it sounds like a joke, but it is structurally true. She is not the third wheel. She is the second. Stedman is the one on the outside. So what happens when the outside presence fades away? Gayle's role becomes even more central. The duo becomes cleaner, stronger, easier to understand. Two women, two careers, one unified narrative. No additional explanations required. And for Stedman, his absence is nothing but loss. Loss of visibility, loss of story, loss of the already fragile space he occupied. Without Oprah or Gayle speaking for him, his identity depends on scattered photos and second-hand reports. Not exactly the position of a man who once stood next to America's most influential woman. Which brings us back to the core question. If his absence strengthens the public image of others, is it still just an absence? Or does it become a strategic silence? In the next section, we examine the moment this mystery reached its breaking point, Day 19, and the strange proof of life that came from a place no one expected.
Day 19. The strangest proof of life. By the time we reach day 19, the situation has shifted from odd to unsettling. 19 days without contact from a man who has spent almost 4 decades rather than with Oprah Winfrey is not normal. Not for someone in his position, not for someone living under that level of public scrutiny, and certainly not for someone whose absence should, by all logic, raise questions. But instead of answers, we received something else. A single photograph from a seafood restaurant in Maryland. Not a video, not a statement, not even a selfie. A photograph posted not by Stedman, not by Oprah, not by Gayle, but by the restaurant itself, the Costizen. In the picture, Stedman stands beside a tray of crab legs, smiling politely. The kind of smile that appears when someone says, "Let's take a picture for the wall." Not the kind that says, "I'm alive, I'm well, and people shouldn't worry." What makes this stranger is everything surrounding it. No customer took a photo with him. No diners posted, "I saw Stedman tonight." No staff member snapped an extra picture for their own social media. Only the restaurant's official page shared a single, oddly static image. And when the nerve called to confirm it, the response was polite, almost rehearsed. "Yes, he comes in sometimes. He loves the crab. He's very nice." It was the kind of comment you could give about any regular customer, not someone who just triggered a platinum-level missing alert.
Even stranger, Oprah and Gayle did not share or acknowledge that image. They did not reinforce the idea that Stedman was fine. They did not calm the rumors. They did not use their enormous platforms to say, "He's okay." Silence from Oprah, silence from Gayle, and one lone restaurant carrying the burden of proving a man exists. At this point, the pattern can no longer be ignored. Stedman's presence in the world has been reduced to brief, disconnected snapshots. Images without context, images without witnesses, moments that feel less like a life being lived and more like a placeholder, something to keep questions quiet. But the questions are no longer quiet. And in the next section, we confront them directly by laying out the 3 leading theories behind Stedman's disappearance and what each one reveals about the people orbiting him.
3 theories. What really happened to Stedman Graham? When a person disappears from the public eye for nearly 3 weeks, there are only 2 ways to interpret it. Either everything is perfectly normal, or something is deeply wrong. And when the person missing is Stedman Graham, a man attached to Oprah Winfrey's orbit for almost 40 years, the second possibility becomes much harder to ignore. So let's examine the 3 theories that fit the facts. No accusations, no assumptions, just logic. Theory 1. Stedman chose to disappear. This is the most generous explanation. Maybe he's tired of the spotlight. Maybe he wants privacy after decades of being a footnote to someone else's story. Maybe he simply stepped away from social media and ignored emails. But here's the problem. Even the most private people maintain some connection to the world. A message, a sighting, a short video, anything. 19 days of total silence from a man with Oprah's resources feels less like a choice and more like a void. Theory 2. Oprah and Gayle are controlling the narrative. This one is harder to ignore. For years, Oprah and Gayle have presented themselves as a unified team. 2 women, 2 careers, 1 public identity. Stedman never fit neatly into that picture. He wasn't part of the brand. He didn't appear in the curated posts, the glossy interviews, or the celebratory moments. So when he stops appearing altogether, the narrative becomes cleaner, more streamlined. A duo, not a trio. And the silence surrounding his absence, especially from Oprah and Gayle, begins to feel intentional. Theory 3. Something happened and it is being kept private. Not scandal, not conspiracy, but health, age, vulnerability. When someone reaches their mid-70s, sudden changes in visibility matter. And Oprah, who has always been hyper-aware of public perception, may be choosing to protect both Stedman's dignity and her own image by withholding information until the story can be controlled. It is the quietest theory, and perhaps the most human. But regardless of which theory you believe, the result is the same. Stedman Graham vanished, and the only people who could explain why refused to speak. And that silence brings us to the final, unavoidable question. What does this disappearance reveal about the world surrounding Oprah Winfrey? That's where we head next.
The question Hollywood won't answer. After 19 days of silence, scattered sightings, and carefully curated narratives, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Stedman Graham did not simply fade from public view. He was allowed to fade. For nearly 40 years, he stood beside one of the most powerful women on the planet, but he never stood within her story.
He was present in Oprah's life, yet absent in the world she built, edited out, minimized, and eventually reduced to the occasional photograph posted by someone else. Now, with his disappearance, the pattern completes itself. A man who was never given a clear role has now vanished without a clear explanation. And the people who know the truth, the two people who curated every chapter of their shared public image, say nothing. Maybe Stedman chose privacy. Maybe the silence protects something tender and human. Or maybe the narrative simply feels cleaner without him. We cannot know, because the people who could answer the question have chosen not to. And that leaves us with the final, uncomfortable thought. If a man can spend 4 decades standing beside one of the most visible women in America and still disappear without a trace, then what else? What other stories, what other truths has Hollywood quietly erased? Until someone speaks, all we can do is keep asking the question they refuse to answer. Where is Stedman Graham, and why is no one talking about it?